Salvador Dalí, 5 masterpieces, 5 stories. 1. La persistencia de la memoria, The Persistence of Memory, 1931. Imagine walking into a quiet gallery, the air heavy with silence. When suddenly, you stop in front of a canvas that feels less like a painting and more like a dream snatched from the edge of madness. The Persistence of Memory, painted by Salvador Dalí in 1931, is one of the most recognizable works in the history of art. But its origins are stranger, darker, and more obsessive than many know. Dalí was only 27 when he painted it, a time when his creativity burned at a fever pitch. He had just returned from Paris, where he had aligned himself with the surrealists. Yet even among them, Dalí was considered extreme, his mind teetering between genius and chaos. He often said he was haunted by visions, half-dreams that blurred with reality. One summer afternoon in Portligat, Spain, he experienced the epiphany that would give birth to this masterpiece. The story goes that Dalí had just finished dinner with his wife Gala. As evening fell, he felt the lethargy of sleep pulling at him. On the table sat a piece of camembert cheese, melting in the warm Catalonian heat. The sight triggered something in him, a strange, hallucinatory vision of time itself dissolving, sagging, powerless. He stumbled to his easel, determined to capture this bizarre sensation before it slipped away. By dawn, the haunting image of melting clocks had found its form. Technically, the painting is small, barely larger than a notebook, but within its borders, Dalí condensed an entire philosophy of existence. The desolate Catalonian cliffs in the background are rendered with crystalline precision, grounding the viewer in a recognizable landscape. Yet in the foreground, reality fractures. Pocket watches droop like wax, their rigid structure undone. One clings to a tree branch as though exhausted by the weight of eternity. Another melts limply across the edge of a rectangular platform. Ants swarm over a third as if time itself were rotting flesh. And then at the center lies a strange biomorphic shape, part face, part creature, part subconscious nightmare, its eyelashes closed as if dreaming or perhaps dead. For Dalí, the melting clocks were not merely a gimmick. They symbolized the collapse of conventional notions of time, the way memory and dreams distort chronology, the way seconds stretch or vanish depending on the intensity of emotion. In Dalí's world, time was elastic, unstable, fragile. It could liquefy under the weight of perception. This was his rebellion against rationality, against the rigid ticking of the clock that governed modern life. Context matters too. Europe in the early 1930s was still reeling from the trauma of World War I, and the looming threat of another global catastrophe hung in the air. Surrealism, the movement Dalí embraced, was born from disillusionment with reason itself. If logic had led to war, they believed, then only dreams and the subconscious could point toward truth. Dalí, however, went further. He fused meticulous, almost photographic technique with impossible, dreamlike imagery. He called it the paranoiac critical method, a way of painting that blurred insanity with lucidity. The reception was immediate and electrifying. When The Persistence of Memory was first exhibited in Paris, it baffled critics but captivated audiences. Some dismissed it as absurd, others recognized it as revolutionary. Soon after, it was acquired by the Museum of Modern Art in New York, where it remains one of the institution's crown jewels. For Dalí, it marked his arrival as a titan of modern art. Yet there's something unsettling in the painting, something beyond symbolism. The soft watches seem less like metaphors and more like physical manifestations of decay. They sag as though drained of life. Time, usually relentless and mechanical, here appears weak, vulnerable. It is as if Dalí had painted the mortality of time itself. Standing before the work, one feels both wonder and dread, a recognition that everything, memory, existence, even the universe, is destined to dissolve. Dalí himself once said, "The difference between false memories and true ones is the same as for jewels. It is always the false ones that look the most real, the most brilliant." The Persistence of Memory captures that paradox. It is an image so surreal it feels more real than reality. And so, this small canvas whispers a chilling truth. Time is not the master we believe it to be. It bends, it breaks, it fades. What we cling to as permanent is already slipping away. Dalí caught that terror and wonder in a single image, the sight of eternity melting under the heat of existence. The Disintegration of the Persistence of Memory, 1954. 23 years after The Persistence of Memory, Salvador Dalí returned to his most famous vision. But by then the world, and Dalí himself, had changed. In 1954 he painted The Disintegration of the Persistence of Memory, a haunting sequel that shattered the dream of his youth into fragments, as if time itself had exploded. The hook is this. Dalí once said that he wanted to disintegrate his earlier masterpiece, not destroy it but transform it to reflect a new reality. What had once been a poetic meditation on the fragility of time now became a scientific vision, fractured, atomic, apocalyptic. Why? Because Dalí was living in the shadow of the nuclear age. The bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki had rewritten humanity's relationship with existence. If time could melt, Dalí now believed, it could also disintegrate, break apart into particles shattered beyond repair. The story of its creation is as surreal as the image itself. Dalí had become obsessed with nuclear physics. He devoured scientific journals, corresponded with physicists, and declared that modern science had made reality more surreal than surrealism itself. He described his new obsession as nuclear mysticism, an attempt to reconcile the atomic age with Catholic faith, to find divine order hidden in subatomic chaos. Alone in his studio in Port Liggett, staring out at the waters of the Mediterranean, he returned to the haunting image of his youth. But instead of melting clocks sprawled across solid surfaces, he envisioned a landscape collapsing, dissolving into 1,000 fragments. On the canvas, the Catalonian cliffs remain in the background, anchoring us to his homeland. But the rest is a cataclysm. The rectangular platform that once held the melting clock is now suspended above water, broken into grid-like blocks that float apart like particles. Each piece hovers separately as though gravity has been abandoned. The watches are still there, but they too seem unstable, trembling in a space that no longer holds coherence. And the strange biomorphic shape, part face, part dream creature, remains, but even it is disassembled, its soft form shattered into pieces. Dalí's technique here is deliberate. The once solid world is broken into crystalline cubes, meticulously rendered with sharp edges and shadows. This is not the fluid dream of the 1930s but the cold, precise vision of the atomic 1950s. Dalí's brush no longer caresses time as a pliable illusion, he dismantles it, bit by bit, molecule by molecule. The symbolism is both scientific and spiritual. On one hand, the disintegration represents the atomic age, the terrifying realization that matter itself can be split apart, unleashing devastation. On the other hand, Dalí saw it as a metaphor for transcendence, the breaking down of material reality to reveal divine truth. For him, the shattered watches and fragmented earth were not only symbols of destruction, but also of transformation. Historically, this painting belongs to Dalí's post-surrealist period, when he had broken with André Breton and the official surrealist movement. Critics accused him of abandoning art for spectacle, but in works like this, Dalí showed he was still wrestling with the deepest fears of his time. The Cold War loomed. The world lived under the constant threat of nuclear annihilation. In the disintegration of the persistence of memory, Dalí turned his own masterpiece into a mirror of that dread. Reception was mixed. Some saw it as a brilliant reinvention, proof that Dalí was not just repeating himself but confronting modernity head-on. Others dismissed it as unnecessary, a parody of his earlier genius. Yet today many see it as one of his most haunting works, precisely because it reveals the artist's own obsession with mortality, science, and eternity. And what does it mean to us now? Standing before this painting, one feels the fragility of everything. The world we trust to be solid, land, time, memory, can collapse into fragments in an instant. Dalí warns us that permanence is an illusion. Even his own art, immortalized in museums, can be dismantled, broken, reimagined. Dalí once claimed, "Everything changes, everything evolves, everything disintegrates, only memory persists." But here, even memory seems unstable, trembling on the brink of dissolution. This painting leaves us not with comfort, but with unease, a recognition that we live in a disintegrating world, where time, matter, and even truth can fracture at any moment. Yet within that disintegration Dalí also found beauty. Floating cubes, shimmering light, clocks trembling in space, they are fragments of eternity scattered across the void. And so the haunting echo of his most famous painting does not end in despair, but in revelation. Time may disintegrate. The world may shatter. But in the fragments, in the disassembly, something eternal still glimmers. Dream caused by the flight of a bee around a pomegranate a second before awakening, 1944. Picture this, a single buzzing bee circling lazily above a ripe pomegranate. Its wings vibrate in the heat of the Spanish air, their hum sharp, almost insignificant. And yet, Salvador Dalí believed this tiny insect could unleash the most colossal visions of the human mind. That was the mystery of dreams. That was the spark for one of his most haunting, hypnotic paintings. It is 1944. Dalí and his wife, Gala, are in exile in America, far from their beloved Catalonia. The Second World War rages across Europe, swallowing entire cities, burning history itself. Dalí, ever fascinated with the fragile boundary between consciousness and dream, wants to capture what he calls the instantaneity of dreams, those flashes of terror and beauty born from the smallest external cause. For this, he turns to Gala, his eternal muse, the woman who anchored his chaos. He imagines her asleep, suspended in a dream state beyond control. And on the canvas, he paints her body floating weightlessly above a slab of stone in an infinite void. Her skin glows with a soft, unearthly light, not the warmth of life, but the pale radiance of dream. Around her, a sequence unfolds, so vivid and precise it could only be born from Dalí's obsessive hand. A pomegranate hovers nearby, its ruby-red seeds bursting with the primal symbol of fertility, blood, temptation. From its heart emerges a fish, sleek, silver, and impossible birth. Out of the fish's open jaws leaps a tiger, and from the tiger's jaws, another tiger, each creature snarling, violent, cascading toward Gala's sleeping form. Behind them, a bayonet glitters in the air, its blade pointed directly at her exposed flesh. And yet she does not stir. She floats, entranced, untouched by the storm of symbols rushing toward her. Dalí explained it simply. The sting of a bee while Gala slept might provoke an entire dream sequence in the fraction of a second before she awoke. What science could measure in milliseconds, Dalí painted as an epic panorama of terror and desire. That was his genius, the magnification of the invisible, the expansion of a heartbeat into eternity. Technically, the painting is dazzling. The colors shimmer with impossible clarity. The tiger's fur is striped with molten gold and shadow, every hair etched with precision. The pomegranate glows like a jewel, pulsing with inner fire. The vast sky behind them fades into endless nothing, a cosmic stage upon which this theater of dreams unfolds. Dalí uses hyperrealism to paint the unreal, sharpening the paradox until the viewer no longer knows where waking ends and dreaming begins. The social and historical context cannot be ignored. Dalí painted this in 1944 while bombs fell across Europe, while the very fabric of civilization trembled. The bayonet is no mere dream symbol, it is the violence of an age that invades even the sanctity of sleep. The tigers are not just predators, they are the embodiment of fear, of war, of humanity devouring itself. And Gala, floating in perfect stillness, becomes the fragile innocence threatened by forces beyond comprehension. Interpretations abound. Some see the pomegranate as Eve's forbidden fruit, the fish as the Christian symbol of faith, the tigers as primal lust and aggression. The bayonet, death itself, suspended a second away. Others read it as Dalí's reflection on love, Gala's serenity in the face of chaos, her dreamlike calm anchoring his own storms. When the painting was first exhibited, it provoked fascination and unease. Critics marveled at Dalí's precision, his ability to render hallucinations with sharper clarity than reality itself. But others were disturbed, even repelled, by the imagery, especially the violence hovering over the vulnerable figure of Gala. To this day, the painting resists simplification. It is not a dream to be solved, but an experience to be endured. Stand before it and you feel the tension coil in your chest. The buzzing of the bee becomes audible in your imagination. You sense the suddenness of the dream, the unbearable anticipation of the blade descending. And yet, the longer you look, the more you realize, this is not merely terror. It is beauty on the edge of horror. It is life suspended at the threshold of awakening. Dalí once said, "At the age of 6 I wanted to be a cook. At 7 I wanted to be Napoleon. And my ambition has been growing steadily ever since." In this painting, his ambition is not conquest but transcendence, to show that even the smallest sound, the wings of a bee, can summon a universe. The painting leaves us with a haunting truth. Our dreams are fragile, terrifying, luminous. They are born in an instant, vanish in another, yet carry within them the weight of eternity. And perhaps that is why Gala remains suspended, forever asleep, forever dreaming, the eternal witness to the dream of Dalí himself. The Face of War, 1940. It stares back at you. A face, desiccated, hollow, its eyes and mouth gaping, not with life but with endless echoes of death. Inside each socket, each cavity, the same face repeats, smaller and smaller, an infinite regression of suffering. Around it coil serpents, suffocating, merciless. This is not a dream. This is not fantasy. This is the nightmare of humanity itself. Salvador Dalí's The Face of War. The year is 1940. Europe is burning. Nazi forces sweep across the continent, nations crumble, millions flee. Dalí, though living in Spain and later moving to America, is not untouched. He watches as civilization collapses into brutality. The Spanish Civil War has already scarred his homeland, now the world itself tears apart. For an artist obsessed with the subconscious, death and decay are no longer distant symbols. They are reality, pressing in from every side. Dalí paints this work in California, having fled with Gala from the chaos of Europe. Yet even here, far from the front lines, the war infects his imagination. He writes of being haunted by visions of corpses, skulls, endless suffering. Out of this torment emerges the face of war. Look closely at the painting. The central skull-like visage fills the frame, its leathery skin stretched taut, its expression frozen in eternal anguish. Within its hollow eye sockets and gaping mouth appear identical faces, each one repeating the same scream. And within those, more faces, continuing forever, a recursion of despair without end. Dalí, who loved mathematical paradoxes and infinite regressions, turns them here into a visual metaphor for war's self-perpetuating horror. Violence breeds violence. Death echoes into death. There is no escape. Around the head slither serpents, their scales rendered with Dalí's obsessive precision. They bite and constrict, symbols of betrayal, destruction, the biblical curse of mankind. Their coils press against the face, as though squeezing the last remnants of humanity out of it. The background is barren, a desert of ochre and dust, the landscape of war itself. Lifeless, stripped, eternal. This painting is different from Dalí's earlier works of playful surrealism or erotic symbolism. Gone are the dreamlike landscapes filled with ambiguous desire. Here the vision is direct, confrontational, merciless. Dalí strips away the beautiful illusions and leaves only raw fear. It is as though the subconscious no longer invents, it only reflects the horror of reality. The timing is crucial. Painted in 1940, the face of war emerges just as the world plunges into its darkest abyss. For Dalí, it is both personal and universal. Personal because his own life has been marked by death. His beloved mother died when he was 16, a wound he never healed. The violence of the Spanish Civil War shattered his friendships, even alienating him from figures like Garcia Lorca, who was executed by Franco's forces. Universal because in 1940, death itself seemed to wear a human face. Hitler, Franco, Mussolini, warlords who reduced millions to corpses. Interpretations vary. Some see the repeated faces as a hall of mirrors, humanity trapped in a cycle of violence. Others see in the serpents a representation of Dalí's paranoia, his fear of betrayal by both politics and friends. Still others read the desert as Spain itself, barren after civil war, abandoned to the cruelty of dictators. But what unites all readings is the overwhelming sense of suffocation. The painting leaves no room for beauty, no space for redemption. It is horror crystallized. When the face of war was first shown, it shocked audiences. Even those familiar with Dalí's strange surrealist visions were unprepared for the raw brutality of this work. It was not playful. It was not enigmatic. It was a scream captured in oil. Many critics recognized it as one of Dalí's most powerful political statements, though he himself denied being political, insisting instead that it was the spontaneous expression of my terror. Over time, the painting has come to symbolize more than just World War II. It is a universal icon of the futility of violence. Whether one sees it as Spain's tragedy, Europe's tragedy, or humanity's tragedy, the message is the same. War devours itself endlessly, and every face of death conceals another face of death within. Stand before this painting today and you feel it instantly. The skin crawls. The serpents seem to hiss in your ears. The hollow sockets pull you in as though demanding you confront not just history's horrors, but your own hidden fears. It is not simply a painting. It is a mirror, a reminder that within us all lies the potential for destruction, and that war is not an event of the past, but a possibility that sleeps in every generation, waiting to be awakened. Dalí's genius here was not in inventing strangeness, but in holding a mirror to reality and showing it in its most terrifying form. And as the face stares, hollow and eternal, it whispers a truth no one wants to hear, that war has no victor, only echoes. The Sublime Moment, 1938. Imagine the instant before a glass shatters, the fraction of a second when time seems to stretch, when beauty trembles on the edge of destruction. That is the world Salvador Dalí tried to capture in the Sublime Moment. A frozen eternity poised between ecstasy and collapse. The year is 1938. Europe trembles on the brink of catastrophe. Spain has already torn itself apart in civil war, and Dalí has seen death up close. In the background of his life, the shadow of fascism spreads across the continent. But in his studio, Dalí begins to pursue something stranger. The idea that time itself could be suspended, that the sublime exists not in peace or in comfort, but in the fragile heartbeat before everything changes. The sublime moment is not as famous as the persistence of memory, but it holds a secret power. The painting is an experiment in tension, an image of collapse held forever at bay. At the center is a great, ghostly female head, fractured, leaning, almost toppling but never falling. It evokes both classical sculpture and the face of a goddess, simultaneously divine and broken. Around her, figures appear, shadowed, spectral, caught in impossible positions, their bodies taut as if trapped mid-motion. The whole scene is suffused with unease. Something is about to happen, but Dalí denies it completion. For Dalí, this was more than a visual game. It was an obsession. He wrote about what he called the sublime instant, the exact moment when reality becomes unbearable, when desire, fear, and beauty collide. He compared it to the instant before orgasm, the instant before a building crumbles, the instant before war erupts. It is the climax of tension, and yet it is never released. Dalí wanted to trap this impossible second in paint. Look closely at the technique. The brushwork is meticulous, almost hyper-real, a relic of Dalí's devotion to what he called hand-painted dream photographs. Every crack in the collapsing head, every shadow stretching across the desert-like background, is rendered with cruel precision. The palette is stark, bone-white ochres, muted earth tones, but Dalí introduces flashes of darkness, deep voids that threaten to swallow the scene. The composition pulls your eye downward toward collapse, but then halts it, freezing you in the vertigo of anticipation. The historical context cannot be ignored. In 1938, Dalí was already consumed with visions of ruin. The Spanish Civil War had turned friends into enemies, and he had fled to France with Gala to escape the violence. He was criticized for seeming aloof, but in truth, the war invaded his art. The sublime moment reflects a world teetering on the brink. Europe itself was a cracked statue, majestic yet ready to shatter. Hitler's voice echoed on the radios, armies mobilized, borders dissolved. The world existed in a perpetual sublime moment, the tension before the catastrophe. The symbolism here is rich. The fractured female head can be read as civilization itself, a beautiful mask but fragile, already splitting. The spectral figures may represent mankind, powerless to stop what is coming, caught in stasis. Some see the imagery as a reflection of Dalí's obsession with death and eroticism, the overlap of pleasure and fear. Others interpret it as personal, the head as Gala, the muse who sustained him, always teetering on the edge of collapse, and Dalí himself haunted by the fear of losing her. The reception of the painting was quiet at first. Unlike Guernica by Picasso, which roared as a direct protest against war, Dalí's The Sublime Moment whispered its message. It was too ambiguous, too unsettling to be propaganda. Yet for those who understood, it revealed the deeper truth, that history does not move only in explosions and battles, but in the unbearable waiting before them. Over time, the painting has gained recognition as one of Dalí's most haunting works. It does not seduce with melting clocks or dazzling surrealist tricks. Instead, it arrests the viewer with silence. It forces you to feel the weight of a second stretched into eternity. It shows you that the most terrifying moment is not destruction itself, but the knowledge of its inevitability. Stand before the sublime moment today and you feel it in your body. The breath shortens. The chest tightens. You wait for the statue to fall, for the collapse to come, but it never does. Dalí has trapped you in an eternal moment of anticipation. And that is the genius, the horror and beauty, of this work. It is not about time passing, but about time refusing to pass. It is a painting that denies resolution, because Dalí knew that resolution is an illusion. Life itself is nothing but a chain of sublime moments, always trembling between ecstasy and ruin. And so, the cracked face stares out of the canvas, caught forever in its impossible balance. It is civilization, it is desire, it is war, it is love. It is the unbearable truth that beauty is fragile, and that all of us live poised on the brink of collapse. This is Dalí's warning and his gift, that the sublime is not comfort. The sublime is terror. The sublime is waiting. The sublime is now.